The operating room was silent except for the steady beep of machines keeping a dying man alive. Hilda Johnson's hands trembled as she stared at the X-ray image glowing on the screen. There it was, a bullet lodged exactly 2.3 millimeters from the Korean mafia boss's heart. One wrong move, one tiny slip, and he would die on this table. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was that every single surgeon in the entire hospital had refused to touch him. They said it was impossible. They said attempting the surgery would be suicide, for both the patient and the doctor's career. The bullet was in a position no one had ever seen before. Medical textbooks didn't have answers for this. And now, everyone was staring at Hilda, a 24-year-old medical student who hadn't even finished her training yet, expecting her to save the most dangerous criminal in the city. Outside the operating room, 40 armed men in black suits waited. Their faces were cold as stone. Their hands rested on their guns. They had made their message very clear. If their boss died, everyone in this hospital would pay the price. Hilda looked down at her grandfather's old leather journal, its pages yellow with age. Inside were techniques that modern medicine had forgotten. Inside were secrets that could either save this man's life or end hers. The heart monitor's beeping grew slower. Time was running out. "Miss Johnson," the head nurse whispered, her voice shaking with fear. "You need to decide now. Do you try to save him, or do we all?" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Hilda picked up the scalpel. Her hands stopped trembling. In that moment, she made a choice that would change her life forever. But how did a medical student end up being the only hope for the most feared man in the city? Where are you watching this from? Drop your country in the comments, and don't forget to like this video. Hilda Johnson had always believed that hard work could overcome anything. She believed that if you studied hard enough, worked long enough, and stayed focused, you could achieve your dreams. That's what her grandfather had taught her before he passed away 3 years ago. Her grandfather, Samuel Johnson, had been a doctor in a small village in Mississippi during a time when black doctors weren't allowed to practice in most hospitals. He couldn't afford fancy equipment or expensive medicines, so he developed his own techniques. Methods that combined old African healing wisdom with modern medical knowledge. He could perform surgeries that others said were impossible, using tools that others said were too simple. Hilda kept his leather journal with her always. It was filled with his handwriting, his drawings, his techniques. She studied it more than her actual medical textbooks. While other students memorized standard procedures, Hilda learned her grandfather's forgotten methods. She was in her 3rd year of medical school at Chicago Metropolitan Hospital, one of the biggest hospitals in the city. Hilda worked harder than anyone else. She had to. Being a young black woman in a field dominated by older white men meant she had to be twice as good to get half the recognition. Her days started at 5 a.m. and ended well past midnight. She studied, she assisted in surgeries, she asked questions, she took notes. She barely slept. She barely ate. But she was learning, and that's all that mattered. Tuesday morning started like any other day. Hilda was in the hospital library, reviewing surgical procedures, when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Patricia Chun, the chief surgical resident. "Emergency in the ER. Need all available hands. Now." Hilda grabbed her white coat and ran. When she burst through the emergency room doors, chaos greeted her. The nurses were shouting. Doctors were running between rooms. And in the center of it all, she saw them. Men in expensive black suits, their faces hard and dangerous, surrounding a gurney. On that gurney lay a man who looked to be in his late 30s. He was handsome in a cold, dangerous way. His black hair was perfectly styled, even though he was covered in blood. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Hilda's entire year of tuition. But his face was pale, too pale, and his breathing was shallow. "Gunshot wound to the chest," Dr. Chin was saying rapidly, her hands moving quickly as she examined the patient. "Bullet entered below the left clavicle. X-rays show it's lodged near the heart." Hilda pushed closer to see. Her medical training kicked in, pushing aside the fear of the armed men surrounding them. She looked at the X-ray images on the screen and felt her stomach drop. The bullet wasn't just near the heart. It was in a position she had never seen in any textbook. It was wedged between the left atrium and the aorta, touching both but penetrating neither. Yet, every heartbeat pushed it slightly closer to puncturing one or both. It was like a bomb waiting to explode. "We need to operate immediately," Dr. Chin said. "Get Dr. Morrison. He's our best cardiac surgeon." A nurse ran off to find Dr. Morrison while the team worked to stabilize the patient. Hilda helped connect IVs, monitoring his vital signs. His heart rate was dangerously irregular. His blood pressure kept dropping. Time was their enemy. But it wasn't just the medical emergency that made the room tense. It was the men in black suits. There were at least 15 of them in the ER, and Hilda could see more outside through the windows. They didn't speak. They just watched with cold, calculating eyes. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stood closest to the gurney. He seemed to be the leader. Who is he? Hilda whispered to another medical student next to her. They're saying he's Lee Min-jun, the student whispered back, his voice filled with fear. The Korean mafia boss who controls half the city's underground operations. Hilda's blood ran cold. She had heard stories about Lee Min-jun. Everyone in Chicago had. He was a ghost, a legend, a nightmare. He controlled everything from illegal gambling to smuggling operations. The police couldn't touch him because he was too smart, too careful, too connected. And he was absolutely ruthless. People who crossed him disappeared. Businesses that didn't pay him protection money burned down. Witnesses who were supposed to testify against his organization never made it to court. And now he was bleeding out on a gurney in front of her. Dr. Morrison arrived 10 minutes later. He was a 55-year-old cardiac surgeon with 30 years of experience. He had performed thousands of heart surgeries. If anyone could save Lee Min-jun, it was him. Dr. Morrison studied the X-rays in silence. His experienced eyes moved across the images, analyzing every angle. The entire room held its breath, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he shook his head. "I can't do it," he said quietly. "What?" Dr. Chen looked shocked. "What do you mean you can't do it?" "Look at the position." Dr. Morrison pointed at the X-ray. "The bullet is touching both the atrium and the aorta. Any traditional surgical approach would require me to manipulate the heart in ways that would almost certainly dislodge the bullet. If the bullet moves even 1 millimeter in the wrong direction, it will tear through either the atrium or the aorta. Either way, he'll bleed out in seconds. There's no way to clamp it, no way to stop it. This isn't surgery, it's suicide." "But he'll die if we don't operate," Dr. Chen protested. "He'll die if we do operate," Dr. Morrison said firmly. "I'm sorry, but I won't kill a patient by attempting an impossible procedure. The liability alone would end my career, and more importantly, I took an oath to do no harm. Attempting this surgery would be harm." The man with the scar stepped forward. His hand moved to his jacket, where Hilda could see the outline of a gun. "You will operate," he said in a thick Korean accent. His voice was calm, but the threat was clear. "Or you will die. Everyone here will die." Dr. Morrison's face went white, but he stood his ground. "Then you'll have to shoot me, because I cannot perform a surgery that I know will fail. That's not medicine, that's murder." The scarred man pulled out his gun. The entire ER froze. Nurses gasped. Doctors backed away. Hilda felt her heart hammering in her chest. "Stop," a weak voice said. Everyone turned. Lee Min-jun had opened his eyes. Despite the pain he must have been feeling, despite the bullet near his heart, his eyes were sharp and intelligent. He looked at the scarred man and said something in Korean. The scarred man hesitated, then slowly put his gun away. Lee Min-jun turned his gaze to Dr. Morrison. "I understand," he said in perfect English, though his voice was strained. "You cannot do what is impossible." "I'm sorry," Dr. Morrison said, and Hilda could hear genuine regret in his voice. "Find someone who can," Lee Min-jun said. Then his eyes closed again, and the heart monitor's beeping grew more irregular. Dr. Chen immediately called every cardiac surgeon in the hospital. One by one, they came to look at the X-rays. One by one, they refused. The bullet's position was too dangerous. The risk was too high. It couldn't be done. Hilda watched as hope drained from the room. She looked at the X-ray again, studying the bullet's position. Something about it seemed familiar. She had seen something like this before, but where? Then it hit her. She pulled out her grandfather's journal from her bag, flipping through the pages frantically. Her grandfather had written about a similar case. A man with a piece of shrapnel near his heart after a factory explosion in 1962. The hospitals had refused to operate, saying it was impossible. But her grandfather had developed a technique. He called it the patient approach, a way to remove foreign objects near the heart without moving the heart itself. It required special tools that he had designed himself, tools that didn't exist in modern hospitals because medicine had moved on to more advanced methods. But Hilda had those tools. Her grandfather had left them to her. She kept them in her locker as a reminder of him. Her hands trembled as she read his notes. Could this work? Could a technique from 60 years ago, developed by a rural doctor with limited resources, actually save the life of a mafia boss in a modern hospital? There might be a way, Hilda heard herself saying. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at her. What did you say? Dr. Chen asked. Hilda swallowed hard. I said there might be a way to remove the bullet. Dr. Morrison shook his head. Miss Johnson, with all due respect, You're a third-year medical student. This is beyond. My grandfather performed a similar surgery in 1962, Hilda interrupted, her voice growing stronger. He developed a technique for removing foreign objects near the heart without traditional cardiac surgery. It's all documented in his journal. She held up the worn leather book. Several doctors exchanged skeptical glances. 1962? Dr. Chen said doubtfully. Medicine has advanced significantly since then. Whatever technique your grandfather used is probably obsolete. Or maybe we forgot something important in all our advancement, Hilda said. Maybe we got so focused on complex procedures that we forgot simpler solutions. My grandfather's technique is based on precision and patience, not force and speed. He would stabilize the surrounding tissue first, create a pathway for removal that follows the body's natural structure rather than fighting against it, and use tools specifically designed to grip foreign objects without causing additional trauma. The scarred man stepped forward again. She will operate, he announced. Absolutely not, Dr. Morrison said firmly. She's not qualified. She's not even a licensed doctor yet. Then you will assist her, the scarred man said. It wasn't a suggestion. This is insane, another doctor muttered. But Dr. Chen was looking at Hilda thoughtfully. Show me the technique, she said. Explain exactly how it would work. Hilda opened her grandfather's journal to the relevant pages. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady as she explained. She showed them his drawings, his step-by-step documentation, his success rates. She explained how the technique worked, why it worked, and why it might be the only option for Li Minjun's specific case. As she talked, she could see Dr. Chen's skepticism slowly turning into interest, and then into cautious hope. It's theoretically sound, Dr. Chen admitted. But Miss Johnson, do you understand what you're suggesting? If this fails, if he dies during this procedure, you could face criminal charges. Your medical career would be over before it even started. And these men, she glanced at the armed guards, they've made it clear what will happen if their boss dies. Hilda looked at Li Minjun's pale face. His breathing was getting weaker. The heart monitor showed his heartbeat becoming more irregular. He had maybe an hour left, probably less. She thought about her grandfather. He had faced impossible situations with limited resources and had found ways to save people when no one else could. He had taught her that medicine wasn't just about following textbooks and procedures. It was about seeing solutions where others saw only problems. I can do this, Hilda said quietly. I can save him. The words hung in the air like a challenge to fate itself. Dr. Chen took a deep breath. This is highly irregular. I'll need to get approval from the hospital director, and we'll need Dr. Morrison to supervise, and you'll need to sign documents taking full responsibility. There's no time for all that, the scarred man interrupted. He operates now, or people start dying. Starting with you. He raised his gun again, pointing it directly at Dr. Chen's head. In that moment, Hilda understood that this wasn't just about medicine anymore. This was about survival for Li Minjun, for the doctors, for everyone in this hospital. The men in black suits didn't care about medical protocols or legal procedures. They cared about results. I'll do it, Hilda said firmly. Get me to an operating room. Get me my grandfather's tools from my locker. And somebody please get Dr. Morrison, because I'm going to need his guidance, even if he won't operate himself. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Dr. Chen nodded. Prep operating room 3, she ordered. Move. The hospital burst into action. Nurses rushed to prepare the operating room. Hilda ran to her locker to get her grandfather's old surgical tools. Instruments that looked primitive compared to modern equipment, but which had been designed specifically for this type of delicate work. As they wheeled Li Minjun toward the operating room, the scarred man grabbed Hilda's arm. His grip was like iron. If he dies, the man said coldly, you die. Everyone you love dies. Do you understand? Hilda looked him in the eye. He won't die, she said with more confidence than she felt. Not today. The scarred man released her arm and stepped back. In operating room 3, Hilda scrubbed in while nurses helped her into surgical gown and gloves. Through the window, she could see 40 armed men lining the hospital corridors. This wasn't just surgery. It was a hostage situation. The entire hospital was holding its breath. Dr. Morrison entered the operating room, though his face showed he thought this was a mistake. I still think this is madness, he said quietly to Hilda. But I'll assist you, if only to try to save everyone when this goes wrong. It won't go wrong, Hilda said, opening her grandfather's journal to the relevant pages. She placed it where she could see it during the surgery. Li Minjun was unconscious now, kept alive by machines. Hilda looked at the monitors showing his vital signs. His heart rate was dangerously low. His blood pressure was barely registering. Time was almost up. Hilda picked up her grandfather's first tool, a thin probe designed to stabilize tissue without applying pressure. She had practiced with these tools countless times in her apartment, working on models, studying her grandfather's techniques until she could perform them with her eyes closed. But this wasn't practice. This was real. She made the first incision. And then the real story began. Hilda's hands moved with careful precision as she made the first incision through Lee Minjun's chest. The scalpel cut through skin and tissue, revealing the layers beneath. Blood welled up immediately, but the suction tube in the nurse's hand cleared it away just as quickly. "Vitals?" Hilda asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Heart rate 52 and dropping," the anesthesiologist called out. "Blood pressure 80/50. He's crashing slowly but steadily." "We need to move faster," Dr. Morrison said, his experienced eyes watching every move Hilda made. "At this rate, he'll be dead before you even reach the bullet." "No," Hilda said firmly, not looking up from her work. "My grandfather's technique requires patience. If we rush, we make mistakes. If we make mistakes, he dies." She could feel the weight of everyone's stares, the surgical team in the room, the armed men watching through the windows, the entire hospital holding its breath. But Hilda blocked it all out. Right now, there was only the surgery, only the life beneath her hands. She reached for one of her grandfather's special tools, a retractor that looked nothing like the modern ones on the surgical tray. It was made of an old steel alloy, shaped in a way that distributed pressure evenly across tissue without causing trauma. Modern retractors were designed for efficiency and speed. Her grandfather's tools were designed for gentleness and precision. "What is that thing?" one of the nurses whispered, staring at the unusual instrument. "It's a tissue stabilizer," Hilda explained as she carefully positioned it. Modern retractors pull tissue apart by force. This one supports the tissue while creating space. It works with the body instead of against it. She inserted the retractor slowly, watching as it gently created an opening that revealed the chest cavity. Through the opening, she could see Lee Minjun's heart beating weakly, each contraction slower than the last. And there, lodged between the left atrium and the aorta, she could see the bullet. It gleamed dully under the surgical lights, a small piece of metal that held the power of life and death. "Oh God," breathed Dr. Morrison. "It's worse than the X-rays showed. It's actually touching both vessels. Every heartbeat is pushing it deeper." He was right. Hilda could see it now with her own eyes. The bullet had created a small depression in both the atrium and the aorta. It hadn't punctured through yet, but each heartbeat compressed the heart muscle, which pushed the bullet slightly harder against the vessel walls. It was only a matter of time before it broke through. "How much time do I have?" Hilda asked the anesthesiologist. "At his current decline rate? Maybe 20 minutes before his heart gives out completely." 20 minutes. Hilda had 20 minutes to do something that usually took hours, using a technique that hadn't been performed in over 60 years. She looked down at her grandfather's journal, still open beside the surgical field. His handwriting stared back at her, steady and confident. He had believed in this technique. He had saved lives with it. Now she had to trust in his wisdom. "The key," Hilda said, speaking as much to herself as to the team, "is that we don't try to remove the bullet directly. That would require manipulating the heart, which would dislodge the bullet and cause catastrophic bleeding. Instead, we create a stable pathway around it first." She picked up another of her grandfather's tools. This one looked like a thin, curved needle with a tiny hook at the end. It was designed to place microsutures around foreign objects, creating a supportive net that could guide them out safely. "You're going to suture around a bullet that's touching major blood vessels?" Dr. Morrison asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "That's impossible. The moment you touch that area with a needle, you risk puncturing through." "Not if I follow the natural tissue planes," Hilda said. She was positioning the needle now, her hands remarkably steady. "The body creates layers of tissue, like sheets of paper stacked on top of each other. Between those layers are spaces, potential spaces, we call them in anatomy. They're not really spaces until you create them, but they exist as natural separations between tissue types." She guided the needle along one of these invisible planes, sliding it through tissue that parted like a curtain opening. The needle moved deeper, closer to the bullet, following a path that existed in the body's architecture, but that most modern surgeons had forgotten how to see. "My grandfather called this listening to the body," Hilda continued, her voice taking on a teaching quality even in the midst of this life-or-death surgery. "Modern surgery is often about imposing our will on the body, cutting through what's in our way, forcing tissues apart. But my grandfather believed the body has its own wisdom. It shows you the path if you're patient enough to look for it." The needle emerged on the other side of the bullet, having traveled through tissue without causing any visible trauma. Hilda carefully tied off a microsuture, creating the first point of stability. "Remarkable," Dr. Morrison whispered, watching closely now with professional fascination overcoming his skepticism. "I've never seen tissue manipulation like that." "Because they don't teach it anymore," Hilda said, already positioning the needle for the second suture. "Modern medicine is amazing, but we lost some valuable techniques when we decided old methods were automatically obsolete." She placed a second suture, then a third, then a fourth. Slowly, she was creating a web of support around the bullet. Each suture was placed with microscopic precision, following those invisible tissue planes that her grandfather had taught her to find. Sweat beaded on her forehead. A nurse dabbed it away. The operating room was silent except for the beeping of monitors and the soft sounds of breathing through surgical masks. "Heart rate now at 48, the anesthesiologist called out. "Blood pressure 75/45. "We're running out of time." "Almost there," Hilda said. She placed 2 more sutures, completing the supportive web. Now came the hardest part, actually moving the bullet. She reached for what looked like the most primitive tool in her grandfather's collection. It was essentially a thin wire loop, delicate as a spider's silk, attached to a handle. Modern surgeons would laugh at such a simple instrument. But Hilda knew its secret. The wire was made of a special alloy that her grandfather had developed himself. It had just enough rigidity to maintain its shape, but enough flexibility to bend around obstacles. And it had microscopic grooves along its surface that created friction, just enough to grip metal without requiring any pressure. "What I'm going to do now," Hilda explained, as much to calm her own nerves as to inform the team, "is slip this wire loop around the bullet. The loop will follow the suture pathways I've created, so it won't disturb any tissue. Once it's in position, I'll slowly tighten the loop. The grooves in the wire will grip the bullet's surface. Then, using the sutures as guides, I'll extract the bullet along the same pathway the loop followed in." "That sounds incredibly delicate," Dr. Morrison observed. "It is," Hilda admitted. "If I move too fast, the bullet could slip and tear through a vessel. If I move too slowly, Lee Min-jun's heart will give out before I finish. I have to move at exactly the right speed. Fast enough to save his life, slow enough to prevent catastrophe." She began threading the wire loop into the chest cavity. Her hands moved with a surgeon's precision, but also with something else, something that couldn't be taught in medical school. It was intuition, the kind that came from studying her grandfather's journals for years, from practicing his techniques thousands of times, from believing in wisdom that others had dismissed as outdated. The wire loop disappeared into the surgical field, following the pathway Hilda had created with her sutures. She couldn't see where it was going anymore. She had to work by feel, by sense, by trusting her training. "Heart rate 45, the anesthesiologist said, tension clear in his voice. "Blood pressure 70/40. He's in critical condition." Hilda's concentration was absolute. She could feel the wire loop moving through tissue, could sense when it encountered resistance and when it flowed freely. It was like reading Braille with her fingertips, interpreting information that came through touch rather than sight. Then she felt it. The wire loop had circled the bullet completely. "The loop is in position," she announced. "Beginning extraction now." This was the moment everything could go wrong. If she pulled too hard, the bullet would tear through the blood vessels. If she pulled unevenly, the bullet would tilt and cause the same catastrophic result. She had to pull with perfect, even pressure, at exactly the right angle, moving the bullet along the precise pathway she had created. Hilda began to pull. The bullet moved. Just a fraction of a millimeter, but it moved. Everyone in the operating room held their breath. Hilda pulled again, her movements so small they were almost invisible. The bullet moved another fraction. Then another. It was working. The sutures she had placed were supporting the surrounding tissue, preventing it from collapsing as the bullet moved. The wire loop was gripping the bullet firmly enough to move it, but gently enough not to cause additional trauma. "Heart rate 42, the anesthesiologist called out. "He's almost gone." "Just a little more," Hilda whispered. She was pulling the bullet out along the pathway, millimeter by millimeter. Through her fingers, she could feel the texture of tissue, the resistance of muscle, the delicate give of blood vessels. The bullet was halfway out now. Hilda could see the tip of it emerging from the tissue. Just a little further. Just a little more. And then disaster struck. Lee Min-jun's body suddenly jerked. An involuntary muscle spasm, triggered by his failing heart. The movement was tiny, but in microsurgery, tiny movements were catastrophic. The bullet shifted. "No!" Dr. Morrison shouted. Hilda saw it happening in slow motion. The bullet tilted in the tissue, its sharp edge pressing against the wall of the aorta. In seconds, it would puncture through. Lee Min-jun would bleed out, and everyone in this hospital would die along with him. But Hilda's hands were already moving. Without thinking, operating purely on instinct and training, she did something her grandfather had written about, but that she had never actually attempted. She released the wire loop's grip on the bullet and instead used the loop itself to create a barrier between the bullet and the aorta. The wire, flexible and strong, slipped between the bullet's edge and the blood vessel wall. It was less than a millimeter of space, but it was enough. The wire took the pressure of the bullet's sharp edge, protecting the delicate vessel wall. "What are you doing?" Dr. Morrison asked, his voice tight with stress. Hilda walked out of the scrub room and headed toward the ICU. The scarred man was there, waiting for her as promised. He didn't speak, just gestured for her to follow him. As they walked through the hospital corridors, Hilda noticed how everyone moved out of their way. Doctors, nurses, patients. They all seemed to sense the danger radiating from the men in black suits and gave them a wide berth. They reached the ICU. Through the glass window, Hilda could see Lee Min-jun lying in bed, still unconscious but stable. Machines monitored his vital signs, showing steady improvement. Against all odds, he was going to survive. "He will wake soon," the scarred man said. "When he does, he will want to thank you personally. And then," he paused, his expression unreadable, "then your real problems begin." "What do you mean?" Hilda asked, her heart racing. The scarred man looked at her with something that might have been pity. "You saved the life of Lee Min-jun. That makes you valuable. In our world, valuable people are either protected or eliminated. Mr. Lee will decide who you are." Before Hilda could respond, alarms began blaring in the ICU. Nurses rushed past her into Lee Min-jun's room. Hilda's medical training kicked in immediately, and she ran after them. Lee Min-jun's eyes were open. He was awake, and he was staring directly at Hilda. Lee Min-jun's eyes locked onto Hilda's, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. His gaze was intense, calculating, like a predator assessing prey. But there was something else there too, something Hilda couldn't quite identify. Curiosity? Respect? Gratitude? The nurses rushed around him, checking monitors and adjusting IVs, but Lee Min-jun's attention never wavered from Hilda. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry from the anesthesia. A nurse quickly brought him water, helping him take small sips. "You," he finally said, his voice hoarse but strong. "You're the one who saved me." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Hilda stepped closer to the bed, her medical training overriding her fear. "How are you feeling, Mr. Lee? Any pain in your chest? Difficulty breathing?" A small smile played at the corners of Lee Min-jun's lips. "Even now, you think like a doctor. No concern for who I am or what I do. Only concern for my health." He paused, taking another sip of water. "Yes, there is pain, but I've felt worse." The scarred man moved to stand beside the bed, speaking rapidly in Korean. Lee Min-jun listened, his expression unreadable, then responded in the same language. The conversation went back and forth for a minute, and though Hilda couldn't understand the words, she could sense the tension in them. Finally, Lee Min-jun raised a hand, silencing the scarred man. He turned back to Hilda. "My associate, Jang Min, tells me that every surgeon in this hospital refused to operate on me. He says they all claimed it was impossible, that the bullet could not be removed without killing me." His dark eyes studied her face. "Yet here I am, alive, breathing, recovering, because a medical student succeeded where experienced surgeons failed. I used my grandfather's technique," Hilda explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's an older method that—" "I know what you used," Lee Min-jun interrupted. "While you were operating, Jang Min had his men research you. Hilda Johnson, 24 years old, third-year medical student at Chicago Metropolitan Hospital. Orphaned at age 8, raised by your grandfather Samuel Johnson until his death 3 years ago. Your grandfather was a rural doctor in Mississippi who developed unconventional surgical techniques. You keep his journal with you always and study his methods more than your textbooks." Hilda felt a chill run down her spine. He had learned all of that while she was operating on him? How much more did he know? "You're wondering what else I know about you," Lee Min-jun said, reading her expression. "I know you work 16-hour days. I know you have student loans totaling $200,000. I know your apartment is in a dangerous neighborhood because it's all you can afford. I know you send money every month to your grandmother in Mississippi, even though you barely have enough for yourself. I know you've been studying medicine because your grandfather believed you had a gift for healing, and you want to honor his memory." Hilda's hands clenched into fists. "You had no right to." "I have every right," Lee Min-jun said, his voice suddenly hard as steel. "You held my life in your hands. Before I allow anyone to cut into my body, I learn everything about them. It's how I've survived in my world for so long. Your world, Hilda repeated bitterly. You mean the criminal underworld. You mean the world of violence and fear and... Careful, Jiang Min warned, his hand moving to his gun. But Li Minjun raised his hand again, stopping his bodyguard. No, let her speak. She saved my life. She's earned the right to speak freely, at least for today. He looked at Hilda with something that might have been respect. You were saying? Hilda took a deep breath, knowing she was probably making a terrible mistake, but unable to stop herself. I took an oath to save lives. That's why I operated on you. Not because I wanted to. Not because I approve of who you are or what you do. But because you were a human being who needed help, and I had the skills to provide it. That's what doctors do. Even when the human being is a monster? Li Minjun asked softly. The question hung in the air. Hilda met his gaze directly. I'm not here to judge who's a monster and who isn't. I'm here to heal. That's my job. For a long moment, Li Minjun said nothing. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound that made him wince and clutch his chest. Pain, he explained. Laughing hurts. But that was worth the pain. He looked at Hilda with renewed interest. You're either very brave or very foolish, Miss Johnson. Most people are too terrified to speak to me honestly. I'm probably both, Hilda admitted. Li Minjun smiled again, genuinely this time. Yes, I think you are. He shifted in the bed, trying to sit up more. A nurse moved to help him, but he waved her away. Leave us. All of you. I need to speak with Miss Johnson privately. The nurses looked uncertain. Jiang Min frowned. Boss, you need medical supervision. You just had. I said leave, Li Minjun repeated, his voice carrying absolute authority. The nurses filed out quickly. Jiang Min hesitated, clearly unhappy, but finally followed. The door closed, leaving Hilda alone with the man she had saved. The beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound for several seconds. Do you know why I'm still alive, Miss Johnson? Li Minjun finally asked. Because I removed a bullet from near your heart, Hilda answered. No. I'm alive because I understand debts. In my world, everything is about debts and obligations. Who owes whom? Who has power over whom? It's a delicate balance like a spider's web. One strand breaks, and the entire structure changes. He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. You saved my life. That creates a debt. A very significant debt. Hilda felt her stomach tighten. I don't want anything from you. That's irrelevant. The debt exists whether you want it or not. In my culture, such a debt is called yunhai, a favor that must be repaid. And I always repay my debts, Miss Johnson. Always. I told you I did it because I'm a doctor. You don't owe me anything. But I do, Li Minjun insisted. And that presents both of us with a problem. You see, I have enemies. Many enemies. People who would very much like to see me dead. When they discover that you're the reason I survived, they will come after you. They'll try to kill you. Not just to hurt me, but to eliminate the possibility that you might save my life again in the future. Hilda's blood ran cold. What? You didn't think about that, did you? Li Minjun said, his voice almost gentle. You were focused on the medical challenge, on saving a life. But actions have consequences, Miss Johnson. By saving me, you've made yourself a target. That's not fair, Hilda protested, her voice rising. I was just doing my job. Fair. Li Minjun laughed again, then winced. There's no such thing as fair. There's only what is. And what is that you're now connected to me. My enemies will come for you. The police may try to use you to get to me. Other criminal organizations will try to turn you into an asset or eliminate you as a threat. Your simple life as a medical student is over. Hilda felt like the walls were closing in. This couldn't be happening. She had just wanted to save a life. Now this man was telling her that her entire world had been turned upside down because of it. Unless, Li Minjun continued, you accept my protection. Your protection? Hilda repeated numbly. Yes. I will assign guards to watch over you. You'll be safe from my enemies, from anyone who might try to harm you. In exchange, you'll be available if I ever need medical attention again. You'll use your grandfather's techniques to keep me alive, just as you did today. You want me to become your personal doctor? Hilda asked, horrified. I want to keep you alive, Li Minjun corrected. And in doing so, I'll also ensure I have access to the one doctor who can perform surgeries that others consider impossible. It's a practical arrangement that benefits both of us. And if I refuse? Li Minjun's expression became cold. Then you're on your own. My enemies will find you eventually. You'll live in constant danger, looking over your shoulder, never knowing when someone might attack. And when they do attack, I won't be there to stop them. Your death will be in your own hands, not mine. Hilda's mind raced, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. This is insane. I can't just. I'm a medical student. I have classes, rotations, and exams. I have a life. You had a life, Lee Min-jun said bluntly. Now you have a choice. Accept my protection and continue your studies under my security, or reject it and likely die within a month. Those are your options, Miss Johnson. I didn't create this situation. You did when you decided to save me. You're blaming me for saving your life? Hilda's voice shook with anger and fear. I'm explaining reality to you. I don't make the rules of my world. I simply understand them better than most. Lee Min-jun leaned back against his pillows, clearly tiring from the conversation. I'll give you 24 hours to decide. Talk to whoever you need to talk to. Think about it carefully. But understand this. Once my enemies know about you, the clock starts ticking. The longer you wait to accept my protection, the more danger you're in. And what if I go to the police? Hilda challenged. Then you'll die even faster, Lee Min-jun said simply. The police can't protect you from the people I'm talking about. They can barely protect themselves. Besides, what would you tell them? That you saved a man's life, and now he wants to protect you? They'd laugh you out of the station. He was right, and Hilda knew it. Who would believe this story? Who would take her seriously? 24 hours, Lee Min-jun repeated. Jang Min will give you a phone number. When you've made your decision, call it. If you accept my protection, we'll make arrangements immediately. If you refuse, he shrugged. Then I wish you luck. You'll need it. As if on cue, the door opened and Jang Min entered. He must have been listening from outside. He approached Hilda and handed her a business card. It was plain white with nothing but a phone number printed on it. Call within 24 hours, Jang Min said in his heavily accented English. After that, the offer expires. Hilda took the card with trembling fingers. She wanted to throw it back in their faces, to tell them both to go to hell, to walk out of this room and never look back. But fear held her tongue. Fear and the terrible knowledge that Lee Min-jun was probably right about the danger she was now in. I need to check your vitals, Hilda said, forcing herself back into doctor mode. It was easier to focus on medicine than on the impossible choice she was being forced to make. Your recovery is still critical, and... Miss Johnson, Lee Min-jun interrupted gently. You can hide behind medicine all you want, but you can't hide from this decision. Go home. Think. Talk to people you trust. But don't take too long. Time is not your friend anymore. Hilda nodded numbly and turned to leave. As she reached the door, Lee Min-jun spoke again. Miss Johnson, thank you. For my life. Whatever you decide, know that I am truly grateful. Not many people would have tried to save me. Fewer still would have succeeded. Hilda didn't respond. She couldn't. She just walked out of the room, past Jang Min and the other guards, through the hospital corridors that suddenly felt like a maze. She walked until she found an empty stairwell, and then she finally let herself break down. She sank onto the stairs and put her head in her hands. This morning, her biggest worry had been an upcoming exam on cardiovascular diseases. Now she was being hunted by criminals, forced to choose between becoming a mafia boss's personal doctor or facing almost certain death. Her phone rang. It was Dr. Chen. Hilda, we need to talk. Can you come to my office? I'm on my way, Hilda said, wiping her eyes and trying to pull herself together. Dr. Chen's office was small but comfortable, filled with medical texts and family photos. The older woman looked at Hilda with concern as she entered and closed the door behind her. Sit down, Dr. Chen said gently. I know you've been talking to Lee Min-jun. What did he say? Hilda explained everything. The debt, the danger, the impossible choice she was being forced to make. Dr. Chen listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each word. I was afraid of something like this, Dr. Chen said when Hilda finished. Hilda, I need you to understand something. Lee Min-jun is extremely dangerous. The things he's done, the people he's hurt, if you accept his protection, you're not just becoming his doctor. You're becoming part of his world. That world will change you in ways you can't imagine. But if I refuse, I'll die, Hilda said miserably. Maybe not. We could arrange for you to leave the city. Change your name. Start over somewhere else. Run away? Leave medical school? Abandon everything I've worked for. Hilda shook her head. Dr. Chen, I've spent my entire life trying to become a doctor. I can't just throw that away. Your life is more important than your career, Dr. Chen said firmly. But is it more important than my calling? Hilda countered. My grandfather spent his life healing people, even when society told him he shouldn't, even when he had to develop his own techniques because no one would teach him properly. I saved Lee Min-jun's life today using those techniques. Doesn't that prove that his legacy has value? That I can make a difference. Making a difference isn't worth dying for. My grandfather thought it was. He risked everything to help people who needed him. How am I different? Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. You're not different, she finally said. You're exactly like him. That's what worries me. There was a knock on the door. Dr. Morrison entered without waiting for permission, his face grim. We have a problem, he announced. The hospital board has called an emergency meeting. They want to discuss what happened in the operating room today. Hilda, they're talking about filing charges against you for performing an unauthorized surgery. They're saying you endangered Lee Minjun's life by attempting a procedure you weren't qualified for. What? Hilda stood up, shock replacing her other emotions. I saved his life. They're saying you got lucky, Dr. Morrison said angrily. They're calling it reckless endangerment. The board is scared, Hilda. Having armed criminals in the hospital, the threat of violence, the media attention this is going to bring, they want someone to blame, and you're the easiest target. This is outrageous, Dr. Chen said. Hilda performed a miracle today. She should be celebrated, not prosecuted. I agree, Dr. Morrison said. But the board doesn't see it that way. They see liability and risk and bad publicity. He looked at Hilda sympathetically. I'm sorry, Hilda. I'll fight for you in the meeting, but I want you to know what's coming. Hilda sank back into her chair, overwhelmed. It wasn't enough that she had to worry about criminal organizations trying to kill her. Now her own hospital was turning against her? When is this meeting? Dr. Chen asked. Tomorrow morning at 9, Dr. Morrison replied. Hilda needs to be there to defend herself. After Dr. Morrison left, Hilda and Dr. Chen sat in silence for several minutes. This day just keeps getting worse, Hilda finally said. It does, Dr. Chen agreed. But Hilda, I want you to know something. What you did today was extraordinary. Your grandfather would be so proud of you. I'm proud of you. Whatever the board says, whatever happens next, remember that you saved a man's life using skill and courage that most people will never possess. Thank you, Hilda whispered. Now go home. Get some rest. You have 24 hours to make an impossible decision, and tomorrow you have to defend yourself to the board. You need to be strong. Hilda nodded and stood to leave. As she walked out of Dr. Chen's office, she checked her phone. It was 8 p.m. She had been at the hospital for 15 hours. It felt like 15 years. The hospital corridors were quieter now. The evening shift settled into routine. Hilda walked through them in a daze, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. This morning, she had been just another medical student. Now she was something else entirely, something she didn't have a name for yet. As she pushed through the hospital's main doors, stepping out into the cool Chicago evening, she suddenly stopped. 3 men were standing by her car. They weren't wearing black suits like Lee Minjun's guards. They were dressed casually, but something about the way they stood, the way they watched people passing by, set off alarm bells in Hilda's mind. One of them saw her and nudged his companions. All 3 turned to look at her. Hilda's heart began to race. Were these Lee Minjun's enemies? Had they found her already? She turned to go back into the hospital, but more men were approaching from that direction. She was surrounded. The first man stepped forward, pulling something from his jacket. Hilda tensed, expecting a gun. Instead, he pulled out a badge. Miss Johnson, FBI. We need to talk to you about Lee Minjun. Hilda's hands trembled as she stared at the FBI badge. The agent holding it was a tall man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Behind him, his 2 partners had positioned themselves to block any escape routes. This wasn't a friendly conversation. It was an interrogation waiting to happen. Agent Marcus Webb, the man said, putting his badge away. We've been watching Lee Minjun for 3 years, Miss Johnson. Today, you saved the life of one of the most dangerous criminals in this country. We need to understand why. I'm a doctor, Hilda said, trying to keep her voice steady. Well, almost a doctor. I save lives. That's what I do. Even when the life belongs to a man responsible for drug trafficking, money laundering, human smuggling, and at least 17 murders that we know of. Agent Webb's voice was cold. Miss Johnson, Lee Minjun isn't just some small-time criminal. He runs a criminal empire that stretches from Chicago to Los Angeles, from Seattle to Houston. He's connected to international smuggling operations, illegal weapons trading, and organized crime syndicates in 4 countries. And you just saved his life. Hilda felt sick. 17 murders. She had known Lee Minjun was dangerous, but hearing the specifics made it real in a way that abstract knowledge hadn't. I didn't know who he was when I operated, Hilda said defensively. I just knew he was dying and I could save him. But you know who he is now, Agent Webb pressed. And according to our sources, he offered you his protection. He wants you to become his personal physician. Is that correct? Hilda's eyes widened. How do you know about that? That conversation just happened an hour ago. Agent Webb smiled grimly. We have people inside his organization. Not many, but enough to keep us informed. We know about his offer, and we know you have 24 hours to decide. He paused, letting that sink in. We want you to accept it. What? Hilda couldn't believe what she was hearing. We want you to accept Lee Min-jun's protection and become his doctor, Agent Webb repeated. But we also want you to work for us. We want you to be our eyes and ears inside his organization. You want me to be a spy? Hilda's voice came out as a squeak. We prefer the term confidential informant, Agent Webb said. Miss Johnson, we've been trying to build a case against Lee Min-jun for years, but he's too careful. He insulates himself with layers of protection. We can never get close enough to gather the evidence we need. But you'll have direct access to him. You'll be in his home, his businesses, his private spaces. You'll see things and hear things that could help us finally bring him down. And if I refuse? Hilda asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Then you're on your own, Agent Webb said bluntly. We can't protect you from his enemies, and we won't protect you from the consequences of helping a criminal. In fact, we could potentially charge you as an accessory if you accept his offer without cooperating with us. Aiding and abetting a known criminal is a serious federal offense. Hilda felt like she was drowning. First, Lee Min-jun had given her an impossible choice, and now the FBI was giving her another one. Accept Lee Min-jun's protection and spy for the FBI, or face criminal charges on top of everything else. This is insane, Hilda said, her voice breaking. I just wanted to be a doctor. I just wanted to help people. How did my life become this nightmare? Agent Webb's expression softened slightly. I know this isn't fair, Miss Johnson. But fair doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you have an opportunity to do something incredibly important. You can help us stop a man who has caused immeasurable suffering. Think about all the families he's destroyed with drugs. Think about the people he's killed. Think about the victims of his trafficking operations. You have a chance to save lives, not one life, but hundreds, maybe thousands. By lying to someone who trusts me? Hilda countered. By betraying the man whose life I saved? He's a monster, Agent Webb said harshly. He doesn't deserve your loyalty. And trust me, Miss Johnson, he doesn't actually trust you. He's using you, just like he uses everyone. The moment you stop being useful to him, you'll become a liability. And Lee Min-jun eliminates his liabilities. Hilda's mind was spinning. She looked at the business card in her hand, the one Jiang Min had given her with the phone number. Then she looked at Agent Webb and his partners, their faces stern and expectant. I need time to think, Hilda said desperately. You have until morning, Agent Webb said. The hospital board meeting is at 9 a.m. We'll be waiting for your answer before then. If you agree to cooperate, we'll make sure those charges disappear. If you don't, he let the threat hang in the air. He handed her his own business card. Call me when you've decided. And Miss Johnson, don't tell anyone about this conversation. Not your friends, not your colleagues, not even your family. If Lee Min-jun finds out the FBI approached you, you'll be dead before sunrise. The agents walked away, leaving Hilda standing alone in the hospital parking lot. She looked down at the two business cards in her hands, one from a mafia boss, one from the FBI. Two impossible choices. Two paths that would both destroy the life she had worked so hard to build. Hilda didn't go home. She couldn't face her tiny apartment, couldn't face the silence and the walls closing in. Instead, she drove aimlessly through Chicago's streets, her mind racing, her heart pounding. At midnight, she found herself parked outside a small church in her old neighborhood. It was the same church where her grandfather's funeral had been held 3 years ago. She hadn't been back since. The church was dark and locked, but Hilda sat on the steps outside, pulling her jacket tight against the cold November wind. She took out her grandfather's journal, the leather worn smooth from years of use, and opened it to a random page. Her grandfather's handwriting stared back at her, neat and precise. November 12th, 1967. Today I faced an impossible choice. A man came to my clinic, a terrible man, everyone said. He had hurt people, stolen from the community, and caused so much pain. He was bleeding from a knife wound, and he begged me to help him. The other doctors in town had refused. They said he deserved to die for his crimes. I thought about refusing too. Why should I save a bad man? Why should I waste my skills on someone who would only continue to hurt people? But then I remembered why I became a doctor. Not to judge. Not to decide who deserves life and who deserves death. But to heal. To preserve life wherever I find it, because life itself is sacred. I treated his wounds. He survived. And you know what happened? 3 weeks later, that same man saved a child from drowning in the river. The child's mother came to thank me, saying that if I hadn't saved that man's life, her son would be dead. I learned something that day. We don't know the full consequences of our actions. We don't know who will be saved by the lives we preserve, what good might come from our choices. All we can do is follow our calling and trust that healing is always the right path, even when it's the hard path. Hilda's eyes filled with tears. Her grandfather had faced a similar choice, and he had chosen to heal. Not because the patient deserved it, but because healing was his calling. But her grandfather hadn't been asked to spy on his patient. He hadn't been forced to choose between betraying a criminal and being charged as an accomplice himself. What would you do, Grandpa? Hilda whispered into the cold night. What would you tell me to do? The wind blew through the empty street, carrying leaves and papers in its wake. Hilda sat there for hours, reading through her grandfather's journal, looking for answers in his words and wisdom. As dawn began to break over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Hilda finally made her decision. At 8:45 a.m., Hilda walked into Chicago Metropolitan Hospital wearing her best professional clothes. A simple black suit that she had bought for interviews and important presentations. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep, but her expression was determined. Dr. Chen met her in the hallway. Hilda, I was worried about you. Where have you been? I tried calling you last night. I'm sorry, Hilda said. I needed time to think. Is the board ready? They're waiting in the conference room. Hilda, I need to warn you, they're not in a good mood. The hospital has been dealing with reporters all morning asking about the surgery. Lee Min-jun's guards are still in the ICU. The whole situation has become a public relations nightmare. I understand, Hilda said quietly. Also, Dr. Chen hesitated. There's something else. 2 FBI agents are here. They asked to observe the meeting. I don't know what that's about, but... I know, Hilda interrupted. They talked to me last night. Dr. Chen's eyes widened. The FBI? Hilda, what's going on? I can't explain right now, Hilda said. But after this meeting, I promise I'll tell you everything. They walked to the conference room together. Inside, 12 board members sat around a large table, their faces serious and disapproving. Dr. Morrison was there too, sitting off to the side. And in the back corner, Hilda saw Agent Webb and another FBI agent, watching everything with careful eyes. The board chairman, Dr. Robert Harrison, gestured for Hilda to sit. Miss Johnson, thank you for coming. I'll get straight to the point. Yesterday, you performed an unauthorized surgical procedure on a patient without proper supervision or clearance. You're a medical student, not a licensed physician. Your actions put both the patient and this hospital at significant risk. I saved his life, Hilda said firmly. You got lucky, Dr. Harrison countered. The procedure you attempted had no basis in modern medical practice. You used outdated techniques and primitive tools. If the patient had died. But he didn't die, Dr. Morrison interrupted, standing up. With all due respect, Dr. Harrison, what Miss Johnson did yesterday was nothing short of miraculous. Every cardiac surgeon in this hospital said the surgery was impossible. She proved us all wrong using techniques that we had dismissed as obsolete. Perhaps instead of condemning her, we should be learning from her. Dr. Morrison, I understand your support for Miss Johnson, but the facts remain. The facts are that a man is alive who should be dead, Dr. Morrison said passionately. The facts are that Miss Johnson showed more skill and courage in that operating room than I've seen from surgeons with 30 years of experience. The facts are that she followed her training, trusted her knowledge, and saved a life. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? The patient is Lee Min-jun, Dr. Harrison said coldly. A known criminal. A dangerous man. By saving his life, Miss Johnson has done her job as a medical professional, Dr. Chen interjected, standing as well. Dr. Harrison, we took an oath. We don't get to choose which lives are worth saving based on a patient's background. Hilda Johnson did exactly what any ethical doctor should do. She saved a life that was in her power to save. The board members murmured among themselves. Dr. Harrison looked frustrated, but before he could respond, Agent Webb stood up. If I may, the FBI agent said, his voice cutting through the discussion. I'm Agent Marcus Webb with the FBI. I'd like to add some perspective to this conversation. Agent Webb, this is a private hospital matter, Dr. Harrison began. This stopped being a private matter when organized crime became involved, Agent Webb interrupted. The FBI has been investigating Lee Min-jun for years. Miss Johnson's surgery yesterday has created a unique situation, one that could actually help us bring down one of the country's most dangerous criminal organizations. Hilda's heart began to race. What was Agent Webb doing? What do you mean? Dr. Harrison asked suspiciously. I mean that Miss Johnson has been offered a position as Lee Min-jun's personal physician, Agent Webb explained. If she accepts, she'll have unprecedented access to his organization. With the FBI's guidance, she could help us gather evidence that would put Lee Min-jun away for life. The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Dr. Chun turned to stare at Hilda, her face a mixture of surprise and concern. You want us to approve of Miss Johnson working for a criminal? Dr. Harrison asked incredulously. I want you to recognize that she's in an impossible situation, Agent Webb said. Lee Min-jun's enemies will target her for saving his life. The only way she stays safe is under his protection. But if she's going to accept that protection anyway, we might as well use the opportunity to bring down his entire operation. It's a win-win situation. Except for Hilda, Dr. Chin said angrily. You're asking her to put herself in constant danger, to lie and spy while surrounded by killers. How is that a win for her? The FBI will provide support and protection, Agent Webb said. And in exchange for her cooperation, all charges against her would be dropped. She could continue her medical education without any black marks on her record. Charges? Dr. Morrison looked confused. What charges? The ones the board was considering filing, Agent Webb said smoothly. Unauthorized practice of medicine, reckless endangerment, aiding a known criminal. But those charges would disappear if Miss Johnson cooperates with our investigation. Hilda suddenly understood. Agent Webb wasn't just making an offer. He was publicly boxing her into a corner. If she refused to cooperate with the FBI now, in front of the entire hospital board, she would look like she was choosing to protect a criminal over helping law enforcement. It was a trap, masterfully executed. Dr. Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying Hilda. Miss Johnson, is this true? Did Lee Min-jun offer you a position? Hilda stood up slowly. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to stand straight and speak clearly. Yes, he made me an offer, Hilda said. An Agent Webb approached me last night and asked me to spy on Lee Min-jun while pretending to be his doctor. She turned to look directly at Agent Webb. But I'm not going to do that. The room went silent. Miss Johnson, Agent Webb began, his expression darkening. I'm not going to do that, Hilda repeated, her voice growing stronger. Because I'm a doctor, not a spy. My grandfather taught me that our job is to heal, not to deceive. If I accept Lee Min-jun's offer, it will be as his physician, nothing more. I won't lie to a patient, even if that patient is a criminal. I won't violate medical ethics, even if the FBI wants me to. And I won't betray someone who trusts me with their life, regardless of who they are. You realize what you're saying? Agent Webb's voice was hard. You're choosing to protect a criminal over helping your country. I'm choosing to be a doctor, Hilda corrected. There's a difference. This is your career we're talking about, Dr. Harrison said. If you refuse to cooperate with the FBI, this board will have no choice but to press charges. You'll never practice medicine. Hilda took a deep breath. This was the moment. This was where everything she had worked for would either survive or die. Then I guess you'll have to press charges, Hilda said quietly. Because I won't compromise my integrity, not even to save my career. The room erupted in chaos. Board members shouted. Agent Webb stood up angrily. Dr. Chin and Dr. Morrison rushed to Hilda's defense. But Hilda barely heard any of it. She had made her choice, and surprisingly, she felt at peace. Her grandfather had taught her to follow her calling, even when it was hard, even when it cost her everything. She had saved Lee Min-jun's life because that's what doctors do. And if accepting his protection meant she could continue saving lives, then she would do that too. But on her own terms, not as an FBI informant, not as someone who betrayed the trust placed in her. The meeting dissolved into arguments that Hilda stopped listening to. She quietly gathered her things and walked out of the conference room. Dr. Chin followed her into the hallway. Hilda, what are you doing? Dr. Chin asked, her voice filled with worry. You just destroyed your entire future. Maybe, Hilda admitted. Or maybe I just saved it. Dr. Chin, my grandfather used to say that if you compromise your principles to save your career, you end up with neither. I can't be the doctor I want to be if I start by betraying everything medicine stands for. But the board will press charges. You'll lose everything. Then I'll fight the charges, Hilda said. And if I lose, I'll find another way to practice medicine. My grandfather did it in Mississippi when hospitals wouldn't hire black doctors. I'll figure it out too. Dr. Chin looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her into a hug. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish. Maybe both. Definitely both, Hilda said, managing a small smile. They stood there in the hallway for a moment, then Hilda's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered it. Hello. Miss Johnson, this is Jiang Min. Mr. Lee would like to see you. He has heard about the board meeting. He wants to speak with you immediately. Hilda looked at Dr. Chun, then at the business card still in her pocket, the one with Lee Min-jun's number on it. She had 24 hours to make her decision, but really, she had already made it. I'll be there in 30 minutes, Hilda said. Hilda walked back into Lee Min-jun's ICU room alone. The mafia boss was sitting up now, looking much stronger than he had the day before. His color was better, his breathing was steady, and his eyes were sharp and alert. Jiang Min stood guard at the door, but Lee Min-jun gestured for him to leave. Miss Johnson, Lee Min-jun said once they were alone. I heard about your board meeting. I heard what you told the FBI. A small smile played on his lips. You refused to spy on me. I'm a doctor, Hilda said simply. I don't lie to my patients. Even when that patient is a criminal? Lee Min-jun asked. Even when refusing to lie might cost you everything? Even then, Hilda confirmed. Lee Min-jun studied her for a long moment. You're either very principled or very naive, Miss Johnson. I haven't decided which. Does it matter? Hilda asked. Perhaps not. Lee Min-jun gestured to the chair beside his bed. Sit. We need to talk about your future. Hilda sat, her heart pounding. This was it. The moment that would determine the rest of her life. I've been thinking about my offer, Lee Min-jun said. About what I'm really asking of you. You saved my life using your grandfather's techniques, methods that modern medicine has forgotten. That makes you unique, Miss Johnson. Valuable. Dangerous. Dangerous to whom? Hilda asked. To everyone. To my enemies who will want to eliminate you. To the FBI who will never stop trying to use you. To me, because you're one of the few people in the world who could save me if I'm ever injured again. He paused. And dangerous to yourself, because you have a gift that the world will try to exploit. So what are you offering? Hilda asked directly. Protection, as I said before. But also something else. Lee Min-jun leaned forward slightly. I will pay for the rest of your medical education. All of it. Tuition, books, living expenses. Everything. In exchange, you'll be available if I ever need medical attention. But, and this is important, you won't work for me exclusively. You'll continue your training. You'll become the doctor you're meant to be. You'll use your grandfather's techniques to help other people, not just me. Hilda was stunned. Why would you do that? Because you refused to betray me, Lee Min-jun said simply. Because you stood in front of your hospital board and the FBI and chose integrity over convenience. Do you know how rare that is, Miss Johnson? In my world, everyone lies. Everyone betrays. Everyone puts themselves first. But you didn't. You chose to be true to your principles, even when it would have been much easier to compromise. He paused, his expression becoming serious. I am not a good man, Miss Johnson. I've done terrible things. I'll probably do more terrible things before I die. But I recognize goodness when I see it, and I respect it. You have a gift for healing. The world needs that gift. I won't be the one to corrupt it or destroy it. So this isn't about owning me? Hilda asked carefully. This is about protecting an asset, Lee Min-jun said honestly. But also about preserving something valuable. You can save lives in ways other doctors can't. That's worth protecting, even from myself. Hilda sat in silence, thinking. It was still a deal with a criminal. It was still accepting help from someone who had done horrible things. But it was also a chance to continue her medical education, to honor her grandfather's legacy, to become the doctor she had always dreamed of being. I have conditions, Hilda said finally. Lee Min-jun raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating with me? Yes, Hilda said firmly. If I accept your protection and your financial support, I need certain things to be clear. First, I will never participate in anything illegal. I'm a doctor, not a criminal. Second, I will treat your injuries if you need me, but I won't treat injuries related to illegal activities if it means hiding crimes from authorities. Third, my medical decisions are final. You don't get to tell me how to practice medicine. And fourth, this arrangement ends when I finish medical school and my residency. After that, I'm free. Lee Min-jun laughed, then winced and clutched his chest. It still hurts to laugh, he explained. Then he looked at Hilda with genuine amusement. Miss Johnson, I just offered to pay for your entire medical education, and you're making demands? You have courage, I'll give you that. Do you accept my conditions or not? Hilda asked. I accept, Lee Min-jun said, extending his hand. But I'm adding one condition of my own. When you're finished with your training, when you're a fully licensed doctor, I want you to consider opening a clinic in a poor neighborhood. Somewhere people can't afford good medical care. I'll fund it. You'll run it. You'll use your grandfather's techniques to help people who need them most. Hilda stared at him in surprise. Why? Because I'm a criminal, Miss Johnson, but I'm not without conscience. I've taken a lot from the world. Maybe it's time I gave something back. He kept his hand extended. Do we have a deal? Hilda looked at his hand. Taking it meant accepting protection from a mafia boss. It meant her life would never be simple again. It meant walking a dangerous line between medicine and crime, between healing and compromise. But it also meant she could continue her education. It meant she could honor her grandfather's legacy. It meant she could eventually open a clinic and help people who needed her most. She thought about her grandfather's words in his journal. We don't know the full consequences of our actions. All we can do is follow our calling and trust that healing is always the right path. Hilda took Lee Min-jun's hand and shook it firmly. We have a deal, she said. Hilda stood in front of a classroom full of medical students, holding her grandfather's journal in her hands. She was giving a guest lecture on alternative surgical techniques, a talk that Dr. Morrison had arranged after the board finally dropped all charges against her. The story of how a medical student had saved a mafia boss's life using forgotten techniques had spread through the medical community. Some doctors called her reckless. Others called her brilliant. But everyone wanted to learn about her grandfather's methods. Medicine is constantly evolving, Hilda told the students. We develop new technologies, new procedures, new drugs. But sometimes, in our rush toward the future, we forget valuable wisdom from the past. My grandfather understood that the human body has its own intelligence, its own pathways, its own way of healing. His techniques worked with that intelligence instead of against it. She held up the journal. This book contains 60 years of surgical innovations developed by a rural doctor who couldn't afford fancy equipment. He saved lives that others said couldn't be saved. And he taught me that being a good doctor isn't about following protocols. It's about seeing what others miss, trying what others fear, and never giving up on a patient. After the lecture, Hilda walked through the hospital corridors. She still got strange looks from some staff members. Everyone knew about her arrangement with Lee Min-jun. But she had proven herself over the past 6 months. Her grades were excellent. Her surgical skills were improving. And she had successfully treated 3 more impossible cases using her grandfather's techniques. Lee Min-jun had kept his word. Her tuition was paid. Her apartment had been upgraded to a safer building. And true to his promise, he didn't interfere with her medical training. She had only needed to treat him twice. Once for a minor infection, once for a broken rib. Both times, she had treated him the same way she would treat any patient, with no questions asked about how the injuries occurred. Jiang Min still followed her everywhere, a silent shadow keeping her safe from Lee Min-jun's enemies. Hilda had gotten used to his presence, though it still felt strange having a bodyguard. As she walked past the ER, she saw a commotion. Nurses were wheeling in a patient, a young woman who had been shot. The attending physician was calling for a cardiac surgeon. Hilda looked at the X-rays on the screen, and her breath caught. The bullet was lodged in almost the exact same position as Lee Min-jun's had been, between the left atrium and the aorta. I can't do this, the cardiac surgeon was saying. It's too dangerous. The position is impossible. Hilda stepped forward. Excuse me, Dr. Williams? I can help. The surgeon turned to her, recognition dawning in his eyes. Miss Johnson, the student who saved Lee Min-jun. Yes, sir, Hilda said. I've performed this surgery before. With your supervision, I can save her. Dr. Williams looked at the X-rays, then at Hilda, then at the dying woman. He made his decision quickly. Prepper 3, he ordered. Miss Johnson, scrub in. Let's save a life. As Hilda rushed to prepare, she felt a strange sense of déjà vu. 6 months ago, she had stood in almost this exact position, faced with an impossible surgery and a patient everyone said couldn't be saved. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't a terrified student making a desperate gamble. She was a skilled physician using proven techniques. She was her grandfather's legacy, walking and breathing and healing. She opened her grandfather's journal one more time before scrubbing in, reading his words for strength. The path of a healer is never easy. You will face impossible choices. You will be judged and criticized. You will doubt yourself. But remember this, every life you save ripples outward, touching people you'll never meet, creating change you'll never see. Trust in your calling. Trust in your training. And never, ever give up on a patient. Hilda closed the journal and walked into the operating room. She had made her choice 6 months ago. To be a doctor above all else, to heal without judgment, to preserve life wherever she found it. That choice had cost her some things and gained her others. Her life was complicated now, tangled up with criminals and FBI agents in danger. But she was still a doctor. She was still her grandfather's granddaughter. And she was still saving lives that others said couldn't be saved. As she made the first incision, Hilda smiled behind her surgical mask. This was who she was meant to be. This was her calling, and she wouldn't change it for anything in the world. Thank you for following Hilda's incredible journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel to support our growth. We're working hard to bring you more amazing stories like this one. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment telling us what you thought of the story, and share this with someone who loves medical dramas and suspenseful storytelling. What did you think of Hilda's choice? Would you have done the same thing in her situation? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget, we're always looking for new story ideas, so if you have suggestions, drop them in the comments. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss our next incredible story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.